So today we are on panel 3, where we speak on the theme of historical perspectives on Tibet. To speak on this, we have two of my distinguished panelists, Ms. Japneet, Kaur, who will speak on the topic Archaeology and China's Claims over Tibet, a case study of Chinese archaeology of the Guge Kingdom. And my other speaker will be Ms. Aastha, a research scholar from the Sikkim University. She will be speaking on retelling the story of Lepcha, spy Kinthup, and explorer of Tibet. To set the ball rolling regarding this theme, I would like to start with a quote by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. He said, according to any principles they proclaim and the principles they uphold, the last voice in regard to Tibet should be the voice of the people of Tibet and of nobody else. Today with the issue of Tibet having acquired a geopolitical value, this theme of historical perspectives becomes all the more important. So, with these few words, I now request my first panelist, Ms. Japneet Kaur, to take over the floor. Over to you.
First of all, thank you, Chair, and the organizers to give me an opportunity to share my work that is ongoing. And good afternoon to everybody. So my presentation explores recent archaeological works and writings on history of Guge Kingdom, which was roughly located in today's Zanta in Nari Prefecture, Western Tibet. I specifically look at how archaeology and history writing are used to establish historical claims of China over Tibet and its implications for China's sovereignty claims in disputed border regions along India-Tibet borders. So in this presentation, I will do three things. I'll give a broad conceptualization of why history writing is key to China's claim over restive ethnic borderlands in peripheries in today's PRC. These territories include Tibet, Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, and other ethnic borderlands in southwest and northeast China. I will give a brief description of scholars and institutions involved in a long-term plans in archaeological work in TAR with specific focus on archaeology of Guge Kingdom. I will cite some specific examples from these studies and works to draw attention to the ways in which archaeology and historiography of Guge Kingdom is used to make claims on historical relations between China and Tibet. So moving on, as we can all see the map of Guge Kingdom, and we can see how it was spreaded. So Guge, the history starts from 10th century AD, and it lasted till 17th century. It's almost 700 years. So it's centered on today's Zanta County, which is with historical capital Saprang. It had influence in nearby areas, Spiti, Ladakh, which they call it as rivalry Ladakh. It was a bursting city with the trade and magnificent architecture. Guge played a crucial role in development of Tibetan Buddhism. Moving on. Now, let me brief the discussion on some of the larger projects of history rewriting of borderlands to conceptualize archaeology of Guge Kingdom. So, history is an essential element in China's claim over contested ethnic borderlands. Whether it's Xinjiang, Tibet, Northeast China, there are different ways of doing history writing. For example, China makes an extra effort to make sure that the understanding and narratives about historical relations between Tibet and China do not diverge from its version of history, not only within China, such as history and archaeology of Guge Kingdom, but also it incentivize or censor scholars and institutions to toe its line. In post-Mao period, Chinese government has invested considerable amounts in history writing of ethnic borderlands. For example, in 1990s, China launched 3 history writing projects on writing history on southwest, northwest, and northeast regions of China. And it created a lot of controversies with Korea and Japan over the claims in these writings about historical relations between Chinese Empire and some territories in China-North Korea border in Jilin and Liaoning province. Archaeology and historiography in searching for long history and identity. This history writing, or to be specific, history rewriting projects aimed at searching for establishing historical relations between Chinese Empire or PRC and these borderlands and the very historical identity of these people and communities living on those borderlands. Long history of Chinese efforts to control historical narratives of Tibet outside China. For example, as recent as a few weeks ago in France, in one of the exhibitions, they used this Chinese terminology such as Xizang. In this context, recent archaeological and history writing on Guge Kingdom gain significance. So why is it significant? So there are 3 main issues involved. First, contestations over its boundaries and modern territorial claims. For example, Guge's historical boundaries are not widely accepted, and its boundaries are said to have including territories like Zanskar, Ladakh, Spiti, etc. So given that historical territories of Guge is divided among different sovereign nation states, reinterpreting history has implication for sovereignty claims in border regions. So the second issue comes in, which is relations with Chinese empires. Is that historiography and archaeology of Guge Kingdom is important to establish Guge's and by implication Tibet's relation with China, which is one of the key issues in China-Tibet issue. Moving on, the third issue, which is cultural and religious influence. How archaeological remains are interpreted or sometimes deliberately interpreted to show influence of Chinese culture and empire over socio-cultural milieu of Guge society and empire, and downplay the indigeneity of or influence of other civilizations such as India. So let me give some of the examples from the archaeological plans and how they are directly aimed at China's historical claims in Tibet and sovereign claims in the borderlands. So taking up first point as the history of China's claims. So China's archaeological work plan for Tibet, which is from 2021 to 2035, which is very recent, launched by Cultural Relics Bureau of TAR government, aims to establish an archaeological cultural framework and absolute chronological system from the late Paleolithic period to the Tubo period, and use archaeological materials to verify the effective governance of Tibet by the central government since Yuan dynasty, and portrayals of similarities among other dynasties like Tang dynasty. So from this point only we can see that how they are relating the similarities of Guge Kingdom with Yuan and Tang dynasty. Now, how they are claiming sovereignty over borderlands. So, Xu Shaoguo, which is who is the Deputy Director, Cultural Relics Bureau, called for, and I quote, increasing archaeological efforts, building a regional cultural sequence, strengthening the application of science and technology, explore plateau archaeological theories, serve national security, actively carry out border archaeology, accelerate the transformation of results, and play a role in public education. We see all these documents and writings, we can very much see that focus is on history of Tibet prior to Tibetan Empire. and the implications for the border dispute and sovereignty. Let me briefly introduce to the institutions, the key institutions and scholars involved in the Guge kingdoms in particular. So these are the major three institutes: the Institute of Cultural Relics Management Bureau, the State Administration of Central Heritage, and CAS, which is Institute of Tibetan Plateau Research, Chinese Academy of Sciences. So these institutions majorly concentrate on the technological as well as the broader projects or the surveys which goes to these such places, such as Guge Kingdom. And specifically in the key scholars, Professor Chang Chien-lin is one of those prominent professors who's worked in early 70s or 80s, and he was one of the first person who went to Guge and started his research on the findings, which we'll be discussing in the coming slide. And these are the people who've worked extensively on Guge history writing and its relations with Chinese minorities. And also, currently there are a lot of other universities like Tibet Minzu University, which are extensively working on the remains and relics of Guge, especially stone painting, wall painting, and taking out things which are relevant according to the Chinese narrative. Now, moving on to few examples, archaeological remains and how Chinese scholars make claim about Chinese influence or connection between Guge Kingdom and Chinese Empire. So these are the headgears, helmets of the Tibetan warriors, which they called as 8-petal chain helmet. So why it is 8-petal? Because of the fall of 8-petal lines. So they claim this as the headgears. This is an imitation. So this finding was done by Professor Chang Chien-lin, as I mentioned in the previous slide. So they have compared it with the. So this one here is the portrayal of the prince from Tang dynasty. I'm so sorry. Excuse me for that. So from Tang dynasty, and the very first one is from the Tibetan soldiers or Tibetan warriors. So they claim that the headgear system or the headgear techniques, it all came from the Tang dynasty, and the pattern of their shields in the front of the shields, the pattern of shields here is similar to what of the Tang dynasty. Moving on, the next picture is again the prince of Changle Tang dynasty. So in this particular picture, they are showing the entire attire of a warrior, that how they used to dress up and how it is similar to the next of the murals which were found in Lakhang Marpo, which is the Red Hall in Guge Kingdom, and how they have actually extensively written a lot about that, how similar it was. The way the headgears goes, which is the 8-petal headgear, or the shield at the front, or the way of the shoes or the bottom of the particular dress, which is similar to that of Tang dynasty. Now, moving on, let me explain some of the examples how Guge's history is getting attention in popular culture also. So Tar government has focused a lot on popularizing Guge as a tourist destination now. Tourist destination not only generate revenue, but also are a convenient means to narrate cultural history of site and its significance of larger issues such as historical relations between China and Tibet. So this is the Guge Tourist Cultural Town project, the Saprang. This particular town, Saprang village, is now a Shaokhang village, which is a vibrant village. So there are several more villages, which I have not mentioned, but there are several more villages along with Saprang bounding that. They're all now converted into Shaokhang villages. And I think maybe the next, this is what it is. So this is the Saprang village, which is now a Shaokhang village. So now this setup has been made to create an infrastructure for all the scholars who want to visit, especially the foreigners. So they open up this space for foreigners to visit, and by this means they can show everybody the Chinese narrative or the Chinese history rewriting of Guge Kingdom. Yeah, sure. So another institution is that Shanghu Kugo Kingdom, which is again the international tourism zone. Now again they have made it in such a setup that it is a setup of a Xiaokang village, but at the same time welcoming scholars and foreigners to study and delve deep in the Chinese narrative of history of rewriting history of Guge. So this has also been funded by Tibet Aid program, which is now widely spread in Tibet. Also being channeled toward developing the tourist sites, which I've already mentioned, Guge tourist circuit, for example, the Xiaokang villages, which are like these. So all this Guge sites, so there are multiple Guge sites, the kingdom sites, so they have all made them into Xiaokang villages that not only relocates people, like all the Han, maybe majority to these places, but also to narrate what they want to in their lines. Now, other than tourism, culture such as movies and documentaries are also being produced to build narratives and tell stories of Guge Kingdom. So this has recently started. This was never the part of China's thing because they were also not aware of much of the Guge Empire. So the very first movie, Iwan Nian Iho, which is 10,000 years later, I forgot to add later there, released in 2015. So this documentary, I'll just broadly brief since I don't have much time. So it is a portrayal of arrival of new human civilization in this particular movie after the vast environmental destruction in the western region of China, focusing definitely on Tibet, in which a little girl named Choma, which is Dolma in Tibetan, overcome numerous difficulties and reaches to Guge Kingdom to seek help from a Chinese Han, leader of a Wu tribe, which they name as Wu Shan. Shan here is a god. So in this particular movie, they have highlighted such things. So the second one is the documentary, which was recently, this year only, on May 17th, 2024, was broadcasted on CCTV 10. Under the title of Exploration and Discovery, with the name of Exploring Guge Kingdom. So this has recently started. Another is another movie which was also awarded one of the best documentaries by Chinese Relics Department. And now, since they are propagating it too much, now they are actually working on the digital experience and the center project to digitalize that how Guge came into being and how it had a Chinese influence and a Han influence on their history. So this is all from my side. Thank you so much for listening patiently.
Thank you, Ms. Kaur, for sticking to the time limit. She has raised a few important pertinent points. One is using how China uses archaeology and historiography, and China's use of history, and in 1990s how China it initiated 3 history writing projects. And what is important, also significant to note, is archaeology work plan for Tibet, which runs from 2021 to 2035. Thank you for that, Ms. Kaur. I now request my other panelist, Ms. Aastha Rai, to take over the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. With due permission from the respected expert in the House, I would like to start the presentation. The title of my paper is Retelling the Story of Lepcha Spy Kinthup, an Explorer of Tibet. Kinthup was the native of Sikkim, and the meaning of his name is the Almighty One. His physical appearance, as mentioned by Lawrence A. Weddell in his book Among the Himalayas, was thick-set, active man of medium height and middle age with a look of determination in his rough, weather-beaten features, with Mongolian eyelids, prematurely wrinkled brows, and had a darker brown complexion. Further, the author becomes very particular about his shaved face, which had bristles on his upper lips. Weddell called him, and I quote, quite a hero in his own way. Indeed, Kinthup was a real hero in his own way. As most of us are aware of the fact that the Sangpo-Brahmaputra River has been a matter of challenging exploration for many Europeans, similarly, we have one of the British officer named Lieutenant Henry Herman, who was very enthusiastic about Sangpo-Brahmaputra issue. He appointed Nim Singh or Nima Chiring and Kinthup Lepcha for that same task in the year 1878. Both of them were the natives of Sikkim. This was the first expedition of Kinthup Lepcha, and with this expedition, Kinthup Lepcha's service for the British government as a secret explorer begins. Kinthup Lepcha's service, his first expedition did not prove to be a successful one, but still he got second chance for the same. The reason as to why Kinthup got second chance for the expedition was because he proved himself as a reliable companion and helper in the first expedition. He was also familiar with the route to Sangpo. So this time, he was to assist a Chinese Lama as per the command of Captain Herman. The second journey of Kinthup has an interesting and exciting faith in itself. A naive man who had no education nor had any experience for the secret mission was chosen as a friend or a servant of Chinese Lama. Both of them started their journey in the year 1880. The mission assigned to them was to explore the Sangpo and to discover if, as suspected, it was the father of Brahmaputra. Kinthup and Chinese Lama successfully reached Gyala in Tibet, across from where the tributary of Sangpo descends in the series of cascades. The explorer then halted at the monastery of Pema Kongchu, where the trail became impassable. In fact, in an effort to find a new approach which would permit them to continue their journey, they entered to a totally unknown region called Pome. At a town named Tongyuk-jong, the Lama became tired and frustrated and had enough of the mission. So he was determined to return back home. But the worst part was that he decided to sell Kinthup to a leading personage of Tongyuk-jong as a slave. Kinthup, an innocent man, waited for his master for several months without any hint of his master's treachery. But his master never returned back. The dismayed Kinthup had no choice but to work as a domestic servant for his new master. Only after 7 months of his slavery, he was able to contrive a means of escape. However, totally committed to his mission, Kinthup, instead of escaping home, determined to continue his quest for discovering Sangpo and followed the Sangpo downstream. After several false starts, he succeeded in joining the river at a place called Dorjiyu-zong. However, his exhilaration at again catching up the twisting and tumbling quarry, which he was determined to track, was however short-lived, because agent of his master caught up him at Marfum and took him to custody. Kinthup then pleaded to the head Lama of Marfum monastery and told as how treacherously he was sold to Jongpen's house. Feeling pity on Kinthup, head Lama purchased him for 50 rupees and kept him as a slave for 4.5 months. And at least now Kinthup got benevolent master who would allow him to leave to make pilgrimage down to a holy mountain called Kongdu Potrang. On this excuse, Kinthup was able to at least mark and prepare for launching some 50 logs. Recognizing that he must alert the survey officer before he sent his log, Kinthup appealed to his permissive master to grant him leave to visit his holy place at Lhasa. But his intention of going to Lhasa was not only the pilgrimage, but also to send a letter to the survey officer regarding the dispatch of logs from the Sangpo River for the particular date. For this very task, he met Nemsing, his friend of first journey at Lhasa, and Kinthup, despite wanting to go back his country Sikkim from Lhasa, he decided to go back to Tibet to fulfill his task of secret mission. As per the letter, the date approached and he floated the logs from Sangpo River as instructed 2.5 years ago by the British Survey Officer of India. But to be unfortunate, Namsing died before he delivered letter to the British officer. And even Captain Harman died from frostbite caught among the snows of Kanchenjunga. And all of these unfortunate events he got to know only after his return to Sikkim in the year 1884. All these details of Kinthup's achievement was stated by Kinthup himself to Weddell, and they were summarized in the report of Indian Survey Department. Unlike other explorers, Kinthup's contribution in surveying the Sangpo River is noteworthy. In fact, his part of expedition was successful. Prior to him, many Pandits and European officers and geographers had made an attempt to clear out the Sangpo-Brahmaputra confusion, but no one provided the accurate information as Kinthup did. This naive man was underestimated by British officer as he was illiterate, yet he proved to be a very intelligent and promising person. He is known for his impressive devotion to duty in surveying previously unknown area of Tibet. Kinthup, all alone and unarmed, forced his way far into this country, carrying his life in his hand and almost perishing from hunger and cold. How he was treacherously sold as a slave, yet he came with the valuable report of Sangpo River. His unvoiced achievement was put into light by F.M. Ballet, who was extremely impressed with the Lepcha spy. He was mesmerized on how unlettered man could retain all details of explorations. After witnessing the courage and promising nature of Kinthup Ballet, the British officer F.M. Ballet writes, Kinthup, uneducated though he was, proved to be one of the staunchest of the gallant men sent out to this hazardous enterprise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aastha. I think we can take a couple of questions. The floor is now open for Q&A.